listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Please go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach, and if you are engaging in anything you think counts as infidelity, I can help you deal with your feelings, clarify what you want, and make decisions about what you're going to do. No shame, no blame, no judgments. Infidelity situations can present us with questions that seem really difficult to answer and challenges that seem really hard to overcome. But it is possible to approach your infidelity situation as a puzzle that can be solved, and it is possible to resolve your infidelity situation in a way that you feel really good about. And when you're ready to get to work on doing that, I can help you with that. There are 3 ways we can work together. You can join my secret society / group coaching program, You're Not the Only One, which includes an online library of my teachings, as well as group coaching calls that are held anonymously. They're held in a way that protects your privacy. Or you can purchase the do-it-yourself version of You're Not the Only One, which includes all of my powerful teachings and assignments online without the access to group coaching calls. Or if you want my undivided attention, we can work together one-on-one via Zoom. All of these options are great. They're just great in different ways. And to learn more about these 3 ways that you can have me as your coach, go to the services page of my website, mariemurphyphd.com/services. Today, we are going to talk about a specific example of when considering non-monogamy may be a red herring or may be a seemingly great way of avoiding considering what you really want to do about a relationship. But before we get into the details of this example, I want to make several things abundantly clear. Number 1, I am not for or against monogamy or any particular ways that people practice it. Number 2, I am not for or against non-monogamy or any particular forms thereof. Number 3, I think some of the discussions about monogamy and non-monogamy that are out there in the world are really good. For instance, a couple of early episodes of this podcast featured guests talking about polyamory and non-monogamies, and I think both of those guests have really astute perspectives. And I'm talking specifically about episode number 10 with Magenta Brooks and episode 31 with Susan Wenzel. The conversation that I had with Susan was great, but the sound quality of that episode is not great. So my apologies for that. Beware of that if you go back to listen to it. Anyway, the point is there are some really good perspectives on non-monogamy out there, to be sure. And I also think that some of the discussions of non-monogamy and monogamy that are out there are total drivel. Which brings me to the 4th point that I want to make really clear. Some of the popular critiques of monogamy that are floating around out there aren't all that nuanced or all that useful, in my opinion. For instance, it's become somewhat trendy to argue that monogamy, or at least lifelong monogamy, isn't quote-unquote natural. And this argument can sound really appealing for a lot of reasons. If we're having trouble in a long-term relationship that's supposed to be monogamous, it can seem like a huge relief to say to ourselves, oh, it just isn't natural for me to want to be in a relationship like this. It just isn't natural for humans to be monogamous with the same person for years on end. Or, as some people put it, humans are, quote unquote, naturally polyamorous. And for some people, it seems like that kind of explains everything. And to be fair, legitimizing the option of polyamory or any form of non-monogamy is really important. I definitely believe that. But I don't think that whether monogamy or non-monogamy is natural or not is the point. I say a lot more about that in episode number 107, which is called Is Monogamy Unnatural? But for today's purposes, let me briefly say this. Humans do all kinds of things that are unnatural, and they don't think twice about the unnaturalness of these acts. Humans fly in airplanes. That ain't natural. Humans eat Cheetos and drink Diet Coke. That shit ain't natural. I spend a good portion of my working days in front of a computer screen, which is exactly where I am right now as I am recording this podcast episode. If natural refers to existing in nature or coming from nature or being caused or created by the natural world, what I am doing right now is definitely not natural. As far as I'm concerned, spending hours and hours a day in front of a computer screen might be about as unnatural as it gets. But yet, I choose to do it anyway. Now, some would argue that many of the choices we make as members of society are not really choices at all, or they're choices that are heavily constrained or influenced by society. And that is important to consider for sure. But I'm not going to go all the way down that particular rabbit hole right now. For now, I just want to point out that we humans do all kinds of things that could be considered very unnatural indeed. And A, we often choose to do those things for reasons that we like. And B, we often don't think twice about the natural or unnaturalness of what we're doing. So that brings me to the fifth thing I want to make really clear. Rather than concerning ourselves excessively with questions about whether monogamy is natural or not, I think what matters is why we personally might choose a monogamous or non-monogamous approach to our relationships, right? Sometimes I hear people making very impassioned arguments as to why non-monogamy is fundamentally better than monogamy. And that brings me to the sixth thing I want to make clear. I don't think that it's useful to say that non-monogamy is better in any fundamental or absolute way than monogamy. And I disagree with people who try to say that it is. And I also don't think that monogamy is better than non-monogamy. What I've observed is that different people experience pros and cons to both monogamy and non-monogamy. And that no matter how you choose to organize your relationships, the mode of organization that you choose will not solve all of your relationship problems. So in other words, you may like non-monogamy better than monogamy, and that's great if you do. But even if you know you like that better, it's still not going to solve all of your relationship problems for you, right? I've observed that some people like monogamy well enough, even if they find there are things they don't like about it. And some people like non-monogamy quite a lot, even if there are some things they don't like about that sort of arrangement. So, with all of that said, I think that evaluating your own preferences in regards to monogamy or non-monogamy can be a great thing to do. And if you're going to do that, being really curious about why you prefer one sort of arrangement over another is a really, really great thing to do. And my opinion is that if you're involved in any kind of an infidelity situation, examining your relationship to monogamy and non-monogamy might be a really good idea. Infidelity situations can be really useful occasions to seriously consider what you want in regards to monogamy or non-monogamy, especially if you've never thought much about this stuff before, right? Some people are like, no, monogamy is not a problem for me. I like monogamy in general. I just happen to be in a situation where there's some conflict with that going on, right? And other people are like, whoa, wait, I didn't know that I had the option of being non-monogamous. Maybe that's what I really want to explore here. And that's great. Like wherever you land in relation to this is great. The point is just that this might be an opportunity for you to consider this more deeply than you ever have before. Now, there's one other thing that I want to be really explicit about here, and that is that a lot of people really want to be in monogamous relationships, even if they are currently engaging in some sort of infidelity. Now, often people tell me this. They're like, no, I really prefer monogamy. That's what I want ideally, but that might sound really hypocritical of me right now. But I don't see anything contradictory or problematic or hypocritical about that. That could be a whole other podcast episode. But for now, let me just say that it's totally possible to want something as our ideal and to not be currently existing within that ideal. I could go on and on about that, but I won't. Before I go any further, I just want to slip in a really important side note. Throughout this discussion, I really should be talking about monogamies, plural, and non-monogamies, plural. There are many different ways of being monogamous or quote unquote monogamous. People define and experience and enact monogamy in a range of ways. Monogamy is not a monolith. And of course, non-monogamy isn't either. There are many different ways of doing non-monogamy. That's really important to recognize. And today I am going to talk about monogamy and non-monogamy using this singular language because it's a little simpler than continuously referring to the diversity within these categories of experiences. But there is diversity within these ways of approaching or organizing our relationships, and let us not forget that. Having said all of this, today I am going to talk about a common situation in which folks sometimes consider transitioning their relationship from a monogamous to a non-monogamous relationship. And I'm going to talk about why transitioning to non-monogamy in this kind of a situation may not actually solve for what you're trying to solve for. So here's what the situation looks like. A client of mine will be married or will be in a committed partnership that's supposed to be monogamous. And they're involved with someone else, or they have been involved with someone else, and they're interested in being able to pursue a relationship with a particular person, perhaps the person who's currently their affair partner, or they're interested in being able to have the kind of romantic or sexual relationship they want to have with someone other than their committed partner. On top of that, they're pretty sure they don't want to be in a romantic or sexual or romantic/sexual relationship with their current partner. But they care about their partner or their spouse a lot, and they value certain aspects of their relationship with them a lot. And their committed relationship, in their own estimation, isn't terrible. It just isn't much of a romantic partnership, and it might not be a great sexual relationship, or there might not really be any sexual component to the relationship at this point. It might be a really good friendship, or it might be a really good roommate relationship, or it might be a really functional family relationship. But that's not what the person who we're focusing on in this example wants. They want passion. They want intimacy. They want a different form of connection. They want to be having sex with someone they're really excited about having sex with. They want to be able to have a relationship with someone they're excited about, not just someone who they have a nice, comfortable, familial, roommate-like relationship with. But they also don't want to lose the good stuff that they have with their spouse or their partner. They might not like the idea of getting divorced or splitting up. A lot of people fear that if they don't stay married to their spouse or they don't stay partnered with their partner, they won't be able to have much of a relationship with them at all in the future. And that really scares some people, understandably, especially if there are kids involved. People worry about this a lot. When there are kids involved, a lot of folks really get concerned about disrupting the family dynamic by changing their relationship with their kid's other parent. And on top of all of that, there are other layers too. There's always more. As I've talked about before on this podcast, many people think that it is a really good idea to prioritize preserving a marriage above all else. That's one of our normative assumptions about marriage that is kind of baked into our collective understanding of how things are. If you get married, it's better to stay married than to not get married. right? Or if you're in a committed, established relationship, it's better to stay in that committed, established relationship rather than to leave it. Now, the interesting thing is that this notion that it's better to stay partnered or married than to dissolve that relationship sometimes appears in ways that may strike us as obviously oppressive. Like, oh my God, I have to stay married to this person who I really don't want to be married to anymore because everyone will shun me if I get divorced, right? Or something like that. But this idea that it's better to stay in a committed relationship than to end it also shows up in ways that may seem totally benign or at least innocuous. And what that sometimes looks like is somebody saying, well, my spouse and I are really good partners in some respects, and we don't hate each other. So why don't we preserve the marriage and just give each other the option to explore other relationships? To a lot of people, that sounds like it could be a win. It seems like a way for everybody to get what they want and be happy. And so this is where folks sometimes say, aha, I know what to do. My partner and I can just stay together, but we'll just have a non-monogamous relationship. Maybe we can keep everything more or less as it is, but we can just allow each other to have experiences with other people. We don't even have to talk about it, right? Sometimes people get the idea that staying with their partner and just relieving themselves of the expectation of monogamy within that relationship will be the solution to all of their problems. And it might be. My point today is not that switching to a non-monogamous relationship with your committed partner can never be the right course of action for you. Please understand that. But here's the little problem that I see coming up pretty regularly. Some of the folks I talk to who care about their spouse or partner, but really want to have the opportunity to explore other relationships, really don't want to be romantically partnered with their spouse or partner anymore at all. They don't want to have their spouse as their primary romantic or sexual partner and then have other relationships with other people too. They're totally done with their sexual and or romantic relationship with their spouse or committed partner. So it's not that they really want to be in a non-monogamous relationship with that person. They don't want to be in any kind of romantic or sexual relationship at all with that person, but they're concerned about telling their partner that. They're concerned about the upheaval that might come with separation or divorce. They're concerned that if they pursue separation or divorce, they'll jeopardize the possibility of having a civil familial relationship with their future ex-spouse or future ex-partner in the future. And when people get really freaked out by thinking about what might happen if they were to separate or divorce, considering non-monogamy can seem like a really convenient way to not have to deal with any of that. Especially when someone cares a great deal about their spouse or partner, considering having a non-monogamous relationship with them can seem like the perfect way to not have to deal with exiting that relationship. It can seem like a really great way to preserve the marriage or preserve the committed partnership, which, as I've said, many of us take for granted is an unequivocally good thing, or at least is better than not preserving the marriage or the partnership. And this is interesting because on the one hand, I think that you have every right to want to preserve a long-term committed relationship, whether or not you change things about it or within it as you do so. I want to make it clear that I think there can be really great reasons to value continuity and to make decisions in the service of preserving continuity or to want, a certain continuity in your relationship or your family. That's fair. That's totally fair. But I also think it's really important to consider that preserving the marriage or maintaining the committed relationship may not be the only way to create the continuity you might desire. You may be able to transform your committed relationship into something even better than it currently is by allowing the committed romantic partnership piece of it to come to an end. You can be great friends with someone and not be married to them anymore. You can have a great familial relationship with someone and not be partnered with them anymore. You can be great co-parents with someone without being married to them anymore, or without being committed to them in that sort of way anymore. So in other words, if there are aspects of your relationship with your spouse or your partner that you don't want to lose, you don't have to lose them, even if you change your relationship with them in some ways that could be considered pretty significant. Now, sometimes people say, well, what if I want to stay married to my spouse and just make it clear, make it really explicit that there is no romantic or sexual component to our marriage? What if we weren't even really shooting for non-monogamy? What if we're shooting for being roommates who just happen to be technically married? You can totally do that if you want to. Of course you can. There are a million different ways of being married or a million different ways of being in a committed partnership with someone, and you can do your relationship any way you want to. And for some people, what I'm describing works out great. Meaning, you technically stay married, but you change your understanding of what it means to you to be married in significant ways. And your relationship with your spouse may end up looking more like what many people might consider a close friendship, or a familial relationship, or a roommate relationship, or whatever. There is immense diversity in the ways in which people live out their marriages or their committed partnerships. And for some people, it is really important to remain technically married, even if the marriage doesn't include things that a lot of people think should come with marriage, such as romance or sex or certain kinds of connection and intimacy. So you can stay married for any reasons that you like, and you can live out your marriage or your partnership in any ways you like. It's important to recognize that. But for today's purposes, the point I want to make is that there's a big difference between choosing to stay married and choosing to change the terms and conditions of your marriage for reasons that you really like, and attempting to make staying married work by changing the terms and conditions of your marriage for reasons that might not help you get more of what you really want in the long run. It's not unreasonable to be apprehensive about leaving a long-term committed relationship, and it's not unreasonable to be apprehensive about all of the life changes that might come with leaving that relationship. It's not unreasonable to be mildly afraid or totally terrified of telling your partner or your spouse that you don't want to be partnered with them anymore. That's totally fair. But making decisions in the service of trying to avoid things that you think will be hard or unpleasant will generate very different outcomes for you than making decisions in the service of going after what you really want will generate for you. Even if you and your spouse or your partner are really great roommates, you might not want to be their roommate anymore, right? And you don't have to want to be their roommate anymore. If you do want to remain their roommate, that's fine. It is, of course, possible that you do want to be your current spouse or partner's roommate forever. But again, that's not the important point for today. The important point for today is that you do not have to want that. You do not have to figure out a way to stay married to someone just because the two of you get along great in some respects and just because you care about them immensely. What I see with a lot of my clients who are entertaining the non-monogamy option is that upon closely examining things, they really want to be able to have a very different kind of relationship than the one they currently have with their spouse or their partner. It's not that they want to keep that relationship and add other relationships to their life. It's that they want something totally different in terms of how they do romantic/sexual relationships, but they're concerned about what might come with deciding to act on that desire, right? Here's the thing, people. You may want to be able to pursue relationships or a particular relationship that are or is totally different from the current one that you have with your current spouse or partner. You may really want to have the freedom to be unencumbered by any kind of romantic or romantic-ish commitment to your current spouse or partner. You may really want the option of forming monogamous relationships with other people. Sometimes people find these interesting ways of downplaying that desire, but you don't need to do that. It's okay to prefer monogamy, and it's okay to want to be monogamous with someone other than your current partner. And again, to echo something that I said earlier, it's okay to want this even if your current relationship with monogamy is a little bit complicated. Or it may be the case that you want to live a non-monogamous life, but you may not want your current spouse or partner to be your primary romantic partner within that equation. In other words, you might want to extricate yourself from your current commitments to your current spouse or partner. And that might be sad, especially if you care about them deeply and feel great fondness and affection for them. But just because you feel great fondness and affection for someone does not mean you necessarily want to stay romantically partnered with them, even if in a non-monogamous capacity. So, for today's purposes, here are the questions I want you to consider. If you've been thinking that you might want to have a non-monogamous relationship with your current spouse or partner, why do you want that? What would you gain from having a non-monogamous relationship with your current spouse or partner? Or what would you hope to gain from having a non-monogamous relationship with them? Also, if you've been considering leaving your relationship with your current spouse or partner, why would you want to transition to a non-monogamous relationship with them instead of extricating yourself from your relationship with them? What would you get to avoid, or what do you think you would get to avoid by pursuing a non-monogamous relationship with your current partner? You might consider these questions and find that you really do want a non-monogamous relationship with your current partner. And that's great. If that's the conclusion you come to, that's fantastic. But you also might consider these questions and realize that what you've really been doing is trying to figure out a way to avoid doing something that you imagine might be really difficult and unpleasant, like getting divorced, perhaps. Sometimes when I'm working with a client and we're exploring these questions, they say something like, well, all of this talk about what I want related to non-monogamy is beside the point, because I don't think my current partner would even consider any kind of a non-monogamous relationship anyway. If you have been saying that to yourself, I want you to be aware of a few things. The first is that, at least to an extent, it's important for you to get really clear on what you want, regardless of what you think your current spouse or partner might or might not want. Do not let anticipating your spouse or partner's preferences get in the way of clarifying your own preferences. If what you want is some form of non-monogamy, it's important to get clear on that and decide what you're going to do in the service of that. Don't let thinking exclusively about your partner's preferences distract you from deciding what you want. On the other hand, both of these things can be considered at once, even if it may sound contradictory. Here it is. On the other hand, if you are as sure as you can be that your current partner would not want any kind of a non-monogamous relationship with you, you may want to keep an eye on how much time you're spending considering what it would be like to have a non-monogamous relationship with them. If you're as sure as you can be that this would not be an option for them, but you're still spending a fair amount of time wondering if it could somehow be possible for you to have a non-monogamous relationship with them, then what the hell are you doing? I'll tell you what you might be doing. You might be distracting yourself from the questions you would get more juice out of considering. For instance, you may be trying to avoid deciding whether you want to stay in your relationship with them at all. Sometimes that's what it all boils down to. We can spend a lot of time and energy asking ourselves the wrong questions. So keep an eye on that. Okay, as we wrap up for today, I want to make sure to note that it's possible that you really do want to consider having a non-monogamous relationship with your current spouse or partner. And they might want to have that with you too. That is possible. The point of this episode is not to dissuade you from even thinking about that option or that set of non-monogamous options. Rather, the point of this episode is to put it on your radar that considering a non-monogamous relationship with your current partner may be a total red herring. So be aware of that possibility and be willing to bust yourself if you think this is what's going on with you right now after having listened to this episode. All right, everyone. If you would like my help working through any aspect of your infidelity situation and my help bringing your infidelity situation to a resolution that you feel great about, let's get started. There are 3 ways you can have me as your coach. You can join my group coaching program, You're Not the Only One, or you can purchase the DIY version of You're Not the Only One, or we can work together one-on-one via Zoom. To get started with any one of these options, go to the services page of my website, mariemurphyphd.com/services. Why wait any longer to find some relief and a clear path forward? The rest of your life is waiting for you beyond the drama and difficulty of your current infidelity situation. Okay, thank you all so much for listening. Have a great week. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.